Okay, well, welcome back after the tea coffee break. Hopefully we're going to try and kind of catch up. So our next panel is about engaging audiences through social media, and I've got three kind of like great panelists. We had a very, very good call a couple of weeks ago, so I think there's lots and lots of really good insight and detail that we can kind of pick through in this sort of session. The first I want to introduce Vince Errico, who's the Chief Digital Officer at Trusted Media Brands. Their portfolio includes Reader's Digest, and he's also led specialist brands like Everyday Health and has lots of digital and strategic experience in the financial sectors. Then we've got Marion Mertens, who is Senior Digital Editor at Parimatch. And she oversees all content on web and mobile for Parimatch, and also launched their channel on Snapchat Discover, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail. And then finally, we've got Hannah Ray, who is Head of Social Strategy and Storytelling at Condé Nast. She's got a real focus on Vogue's international editions. So there'll be, again, some interesting sort of stories there. Before Condé Nast, Hannah worked for Instagram on their editorial team, and her background is journalism, and she worked with The Guardian and other sort of brands. So she comes very much from a journalistic and sort of storytelling kind of background. So what I thought we'd do to start off with is just get each of you in turn to talk a little bit about your current social engagement activity. So that's like, why you're doing it, what's working, and kind of how you're also making it happen, because I want to get into a little bit of how do you do this. So Vince, do you want to sort of kick off on that?
Sure. So we're focused primarily on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. We're not involved in Snapchat, which we talked about amongst ourselves a little bit earlier. There are several reasons for that, but the way that we're looking, and we use those three platforms across all of our titles. We have about 12 titles, including Reader's Digest, and I look at it in sort of two different pieces. One piece I think of as a branding exercise, very much about getting our content out there and looking at what I would call classic branding metrics. And the other piece of it I look at as very much direct marketing. So on Facebook, for example, how do you take a post that has done well, how do you boost it, that then leads potentially to subscription or an email address collection or something like that. And so I look at the branding and the economic opportunities a little bit different across the uses of those platforms. So.
When we spoke earlier, you talked about some of what you were doing with kind of like Taste of Home and getting the audience to contribute content. Just want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So Taste of Home is our food brand. It's primarily, it's exclusively recipes that have been contributed by our readers, our fan base. And then those recipes are triple tested in our test kitchens, which are set up very much like the average equipment that sort of your average homeowner would have in the US. When our users submit those recipes, they often submit a blurb along with those recipes, something that along the lines of, this is our family's favorite Sunday supper, or this was my grandmother's beloved recipe, whatever the blurb is. And that often accompanies the post along with a photo of the food itself. And that, and then the person's name or some shortening of their name. And that sort of personal message to go along with that recipe is something that really resonates with our fan base on those social platforms. Because even though we're posting it from Taste of Home, it's actually associated with one of our users. It's almost as if it's an extension of their own personal posts. And that generates tremendous interaction for us on those posts.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point there about kind of you get more traction when it appears the posts are coming not necessarily from you, but from one of your community.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Marion, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing at Parimatch and the different platforms you're using and how that's run?
I come from the old world. I was born in a photo agency, Gamma, which doesn't exist anymore. From the world of photojournalism, so visual is very part of my life. crazy, creative people as well. And I've been at Paris Match for 20 years, and 5 years ago I decided that the new world was very interesting, and I think I could be a bridge between the old world and the new world, having been raised in that great sense of journalism, of telling stories, and there was no reason why I couldn't bring that my knowledge to the new world, and so that was 5 years ago. Building a bridge is not very comfortable, and it's not easy, but it's very interesting because this is where legacy media like Paris Match, which was founded in 70 years, needs to do right now. So basically, my job is to bring people along to this new world, and having people from the magazine and the web and the digital team work together and produce interesting things.
Yeah.
So I think the way I see it is that it's fun. I love it coming from the old world. So I want to bring people along, and we try to create things that have made them love social media and love the new world. Like Facebook, we do Facebook Live sometimes because it allows our reporters who didn't know they would stumble into something interesting to do a live story. Like, for example, we're talking with Anna about the fashion world, but a fashion editor doesn't know where she's going to have a great interview with someone backstage. So she started doing live on Facebook. So what we're trying to do is, what I try to do is explain to the journalists how we can use social media, different types of social media, to bring new content and to bring Paris Match content, because everything looks the same in a way, and we don't want Paris Match to look as another brand. So it's like, what do you have special that you could show people?
So you want the content to sort of have the Paris Match voice, or the sort of like tone, regardless of which platform. When we spoke earlier, I thought there were some quite interesting points you're making about the different platforms you're using and how you're using them in a different way, and how you're different content or different platforms. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Twitter is more news, is more. For example, our political editor uses it, is very powerful on Twitter. He does tweet clashes sometimes. He tweets photos from where he is. Or it's actually interesting that the people who work for politics are very, very active on Twitter and Facebook, because it's their thing. They own it now, and they find it's fun for them. Beforehand, no one was really asking them about, a photo of the National Assembly or something happening at the National Assembly. Now it's like, where are you? Tweet. And they think their job is so exciting in a way. I think Facebook we use for live, and also to drive people to our website. Instagram, we're talking to about. I was talking to Anna about it. Instagram, what we did is we created Instagram Vintage and Instagram Paris Match. All our vintage photos have a different account. A bit of nostalgia, a bit of, sometimes actors from the 70s, 80s that would appear so cool now. So it's really interesting to see that young people could be attracted to something that looks old. So vintage works well. And Snapchat, we launched a channel on Discover Snapchat a year ago, which when you see Paris Match, old French magazine, Snapchat don't seem to mix, but it does. And I think it's been really interesting because it's brought new skills, and it's also brought something really important for us, is like new stars in a way. Like
new writers or new contributors.
New contributors, and also new people to follow. Because it's for younger people. So we maybe look differently at the news. We look for younger people, and it's brought a lot of interesting things for the print.
So part of the impetus for using social platforms for Paris Match is reaching a different audience. An audience that you're not currently reaching through your web and digital.
And also showing those little jewels we have. We can't show, like Paris Match is once a week. Our website is something that we don't know how people are going to read. So it's like we have all these great things. We have someone in Mosul who does an amazing work on hard news, on war. We're not going to post an Instagram photo of Mosul unless. So when she comes back, I interviewed her, and she was telling us what it is to be in Mosul and what the everyday life of a war reporter was. And I think it's all these things that we could show and make Paris Match very different from another celebrity or news magazine.
Yes, yeah, and I guess also the sort of like the insider, backstage kind of approach.
And also reach community, like we do a lot of dance articles about ballet and dancing.
Yeah.
And it's through, for example, Twitter, we can reach communities that wouldn't think Paris Match is that expert on.
Yes, so actually quite a kind of an interesting opportunity for what we call more heritage brands or brands that are long established.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Hannah, tell me a little bit about what you're doing with Vogue and Snapchat and the international network.
Yeah, so I had a really great introduction earlier this morning from Wolfgang, so thank you very much. He gave a little bit of a backstory of what Condé Nast International is, and Vogue International is essentially the editorial part of that team. So it's a very new team that's thinking specifically about how can we safe-proof Vogue for a digital future. And I actually came on to do a piece of consultancy work about 9 months ago, actually, looking at our Instagram accounts, because I was previously on Instagram's community team for 3 years, looking at the Instagram's communication with our communities across the world. And one thing that was clearly apparent to me was, given how saturated the fashion industry is on Instagram, that Vogue really wasn't where it should be on Instagram. And why was that? So really, I made a ton of recommendations of things that maybe the Vogue editors could try. I actually met some of them in January when I delivered some of those recommendations. And Wolfgang essentially said, can you come and do that? It's a huge challenge, working in a kind of startup environment within a legacy media organization. But essentially working both on strategy, but also testing out a lot of those strategies through storytelling or through visual stories on predominantly Instagram is where I'm focused, because that's where my expertise lies and my background. But I also helped us hire our Snapchat team, who look at Snapchat Discover, which we launched in the UK and France. And just thinking generally about, how can we elevate Vogue on the international recognition piece from, where we were when I started, which was, I can talk a little bit more about, how we were perceived among in the market among young people, for example, and having known from Instagram that there was a huge opportunity there to connect with young people through platforms like Instagram and Snapchat, and just making sure that we could really start to capitalize on that, given how visual Vogue is as a media brand and how much access and exclusive access we had. It felt like there was, what was happening, why was there this reason that we weren't really being the thought leaders and the pioneers of visual storytelling when we could be? So that's what I've been looking at specifically since joining Condé Nast International.
Yes, yeah. And one of the things we talked about earlier was about how you use data to understand what's working and what's not working. Is there anything you can sort of like share about how you do that?
Yeah, I mean,
I think your necklace is attacking.
There's something going on here, sorry. Sorry about that.
That's all right, sorry.
So okay. I think coming from Instagram, there was a lot of things that I understood to be the case, and sort of working with different communities all over the world on how they were telling stories on Instagram, from dancers to steel drum players to tightrope walkers to travelers, and knowing that there's very, very diverse ways that you can use the platform, and then kind of coming back into the media industry where I was before and seeing that there was maybe this friction between big media brands trying to understand, well, how do I connect with readers and how do I tell stories on this platform that was essentially, one thing we forget is it was made for individuals, it wasn't made for brands. We've hacked it to to have a profile page and to like other people's content and to comment. And so I think I had all this kind of knowledge and assumptions coming from Instagram, but then I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just applying what I knew to Vogue, but actually did a bit of due diligence on the data there. So simple kind of market research, really going out and speaking to teams in Oxford Circus who are very international, asking them, have you heard of Vogue? Do you follow us on Instagram? Incredibly eloquent answers, a hugely intelligent community talking to us about what they thought we could do to connect with them. And yes, they had heard of Vogue, which was awesome. And I think Wolfgang talked a little bit about that trust element that we really do have as a brand, but they weren't connecting with us on Instagram. Why is that? Why was that? So really doing a little bit of very qualitative data to start off with, and then actually just unpicking each account bone by bone and kind of saying, which posts are tanking? Why are we still doing that?
Yeah.
Why do a kind of really flat product on a white background post that's like not visual at all if consistently week on week that's plummeting? And actually just understanding like what's the makeup of the teams, how's the structure, who's running the accounts, why, who has access, and just getting those little bits of data as well, but a lot of just kind of digging around and doing some audit and research before then you sort of go in with making any kind of big changes so you can really show why.
Yes.
One of the biggest surprises was actually getting some data on the cross-engagement between the different Vogue accounts. So at Instagram, we didn't launch Instagram Russia until we could really show that our Russian-speaking community wanted to connect with Instagram in the Russian language. So it wasn't just a kind of, we have a community in Russia, so let's just launch Instagram Russia. But then you come at it from the other side, so coming to a legacy media brand where they already have a roster of 47 Instagram accounts for Vogue. Why do they have so many? Well, okay, they sprung up market by market, and it was to do with the fact that they had a magazine brand in that country. Well, Instagram's a global platform, so why do we necessarily need to have so many accounts when we might be serving kind of similar communities? And so actually kind of one of the pieces of data I did at the beginning was how many people actually cross-engage or cross-follow on those accounts. And then the numbers were really tiny, which to me then represents a big opportunity, because then you say, well, actually, there are certain stories that we could own as Vogue, as a global brand, and publish across a number of accounts, similar to how I used to do on the main Instagram suite of accounts.
Yeah.
So you can have certain numbers of stories that we begin to really own as a global brand and not actually kind of feel like you're serving the same content to multiple communities.
Yeah.
And that was a surprise to me.
Yeah.
That's not something I necessarily thought about doing in the beginning, but it's worked really, really well. And Wolfgang showed the example of the Penmaen story that we did back in May. Dance is a super visual discipline that works really well on Instagram, and actually all of the Vogues wanted to run this exclusive piece that we had on Penmaen doing the costumes for the Paris Opera Ballet. Went and did one Instagram story with one person, me, shooting and filming and editing, went across all the Vogues, reaches a potential audience of 16.3 million people, and the resources are much lower. So to me, that's
that
like,
sounds really, it sounds really interesting. So I'm conscious of time,
Yes,
but
sorry,
no,
I can talk about this for days.
and you're around all day, so probably people can get you at a coffee break. One question I'd like to ask all of you before I throw it open to kind of like the floor is kind of how you measure the impact of your social media activity, because I can see it's something that could take up a lot of time. And then how do you sort of assess what impact it's actually having on the brand? So you're going to kick off, Vincent.
Sure. So we sort of manage it in, as I said, two distinct ways. One is from a branding perspective. One is then from what I would call a direct marketing perspective. And there's maybe a third where we have sponsorship or advertising revenue associated with certain activities. So in that sort of setup, we have someone who's responsible for a specific platform, who works very closely with the editorial team, and sometimes a design team or a motion graphics person, to be inspired by that content, but then create something that is unique for that particular platform, something that we know will work in that platform. So then we're looking, I tend to discount some metrics like reach, but I look at things like likes and shares and comments, which are probably a better indication for us in terms of traditional engagement.
Yes.
And I think that has been very analogous to traditional branding metrics.
Yes, and then you'll also look at direct marketing. So you look at
and then
measure
exactly. Then we'll take those
emails or
posts that do well, or those Instagram stories that do particularly well, and we look at can we boost them? Can we turn them into something else? Can they become sponsored, or can they drive to one of our revenue activities?
Yeah, and then how do you measure the value, the impact on
Just
Paris Match.
an anecdote I want to tell you, because it's the same as you guys, but an anecdote that was very interesting for us is when we launched Discover Match on Discover Snapchat, no one from the team really knew what we were doing. Like, they were like young people running around. We were very tired. We were working, doing 7 days a week production. And then one day, the artistic director came to see me, and he said, it's working, your thing. And I'm like, what? And he said, my son spoke to me about an article from Paris Match.
Right.
And I said, okay, first victory.
Yes.
So that's sometimes how we measure
it's
things.
the new audience, isn't it? Yes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's the new audience. And the second fun story is that advertising, a guy who has big money, came to see us, and he was absolutely not interested in the print. He was absolutely not interested in the web. He was only interested in Snapchat because his daughter is on Snapchat.
Yes.
So the advertising people were like, print? It was like, no, bring me somebody from Snapchat. So that was another victory.
Yes, yes, that it can actually get you an ad lead, or it can convert to advertising. Yes. Yeah, maybe. Anything you want to jump in on, Hannah?
I'm personally interested in the qualitative side of things as well. Looking at some of the UX research when I joined around certain audience members saying, like, I don't think Vogue gets Instagram. That to me is not a great quote to start with, but it's also something that I want to change. And then actually we did a lot of strategic consistency work to try and get all the Vogue accounts to a best practice level. And then in Fashion Month, we really started to drive home really new content experiences and visual storytelling around Vogue backstage, and sort of starting to own different types of experiences. And then we gained industry recognition. So people coming to us backstage being like, are you the guys doing the Instagram stories? They're amazing. So that's one bit. And then the second part is then actually having the audience members start to come. So you see the figures, you see the unique view numbers start to rise. Viewership is going up over time. That's the second bit. And then you have certain accounts starting to win awards, like British Vogue did recently at DigiDay for best use of Instagram. I'm like, great, because that's not where they were a year ago. Yes. And then the final bit is obviously kind of seeing those rewards change the mindset of some of the editors that I work with on how they tell stories for different platforms, how they're thinking about Instagram as actually, this is a different editorial platform, that we need a different approach, a different content calendar, a different team running it, and having them come to me and say, you were right on this thing, and I've changed my mindset about it, and we're actually going to start to hire people in this department or think about things differently.
So it's kind of quite a lot about convincing people, or sort of like achieving some sort of change in mindset. Right, we've got a few minutes for questions. So, anybody have a question? Right. I'm going to see if I can manage this. Whoa. Oh, well, good. You have to talk to the black bit, quite close to the black bit. That's it. Go.
Hi. Creating audiences on Instagram or on social media is one thing, but making profit out of it is another thing. So how can you find alternative cash-generating ideas for to get from these audiences you have created, so that it's not only free content, which is an alternative to the magazines?
So it's kind of the same question really about sort of like, where's the money? Where, how can you measure it? Anything you want to chuck in on?
Sure. I think that's a really great point, and it's one of the reasons why I think we use our editorial content as maybe the inspiration for turning that into something that will work on the particular social media rather than just giving away the story itself, although we're often posting the link back to the story on the site. But each platform sort of offers, I think, a different way of looking at monetization. For us, Facebook is probably the one that we're able to monetize best. We are probably one of the few publishers, at least for our Reader's Digest title, where we're still using instant articles, where we can actually sell or promote advertising within the instant article format. We then sell sponsorships across posts that have done particularly well. And then, as I said before, we will also boost posts that do well, that then drive directly to some kind of a subscription sale or a book sale or something like that. It takes a lot of practice to get that system to work. And you have to have the right combination of people, which I think both Hannah and Marion have talked about, understanding both the system and what works well and what doesn't work well, and the quality aspect of it to eventually get all of that to work out. So it's sort of iterate, iterate, iterate.
Yeah. Right, I've got time
Can
for...
I jump in on
oh,
that
go.
question?
Yeah,
Just 'cause
quickly.
it comes up quite a lot, and I think it's really important for me to drive home this point, because I get asked this a lot. I work with other big media organizations, and Instagram's obviously never going to be a direct source of revenue. There's no link in captions. There probably never will be. But actually, it's a brand recognition piece and an engagement platform. And I think it's really important to remember, like, if your brand has not gained the recognition or is not well known, then you can't sell advertising against it in the future. And if no one remembers who Vogue is, like in 10 years' time, then you're not going to have the other revenue streams either. So for me, it's really important to always reinforce, that actually it's much more about brand development and engagement. And I think sometimes, especially in Europe, that's something that we struggle with thinking about, whereas in the US, they seem to understand a lot quicker.
So, and I think just to sort of like sum up is finding new audiences, and then in time that will generate additional advertising revenue or help rejuvenate a brand. But it's sort of you kind of perhaps need a bit of patience. I think we're out of time, so I'm very sorry. Thank you very much to the panel. I think it's been a really, really interesting session. Thank you.